Where's your mouse? Hello and welcome to our WTO 20th Anniversary Accessions e-lecture series. My name is Franziska Kirschke. I work in the e-learning unit. We have organized this event with the WTO Accessions Division. We have planned two sessions in this e-lecture series. We have today Chiedu Osakwe with us from the director of the Accessions Division on the power and relevance of the World Trade Organization. And next week, same time, same place, we have a session on macro WTO and micro government procurement agreement accessions. So today we'll be talking about the power and relevance of the World Trade Organization. You see on screen me, Franziska Kirschke, and our speaker, Chiedu, from the Accession Division. Welcome, Chiedu, to our e-lecture series, the first one, first guest.
Thank you.
You have been at the WTO for some time. You've heard various positions. You are now the director of the Accessions Division, and last week you have launched a book. You have co-edited at the public forum. DG was there to launch the book, and yeah, maybe you want to introduce yourself also a little bit before you start your presentation.
I thought actually that your introduction of me will suffice.
Okay.
We can just go straight to the business that we have to do when you're ready.
Also good.
Yeah.
Then I say, let's start with your presentation.
Okay. A very good morning to all of you who've tuned in. What I basically understand is the first WTO lecture. At the very beginning, let me give to you the greetings from the WTO Director General, Roberto Azevedo. In the past few days, he was at the G20 meeting in Istanbul. He's just arrived back in Geneva, and I've just had a meeting with him. The Director General is, as you know, the guardian of the multilateral trading system. He's getting ready, preparing the members and the membership for the 10th WTO Ministerial Meeting that will take place in Nairobi in December this year. So the organization is hard at work. It's been led extremely effectively by our Director General, and this is an important year for the World Trade Organization. It is our 20th year as an independent international organization. We will be having, as I've said just a few seconds ago, the 10th ministerial meeting. And in various areas of the work of the organization, individual counterpart directors and individual divisions have been organizing and executing a series of activities that portray, describe, and underscore what their various areas of work have contributed in the past 20 years of the World Trade Organization. So my principal task with you over the next 15, 20 somewhat minutes will be to speak to you about the power and the relevance of the World Trade Organization with regard to the area of work where I function with a very effective team, and that is the area of accession negotiations. Before I leap into it, let's have this picture in mind. The WTO stands as an organization, it stands on three legs. One leg, as you already know, is the institutional work of the organization, what we call the regular work. This is the heavy daily lifting that is done in the committees, over 30 something of them, for example, the SPS committee, that implement the rules of the organization already accepted by members. And you know what the rules of the organization are? They are the agreements underpinning the work of the World Trade Organization. So that's one leg, regular work. The second leg is the leg that you know well, because that is the leg that is headline news. That's what you hear all the time. This is the negotiating leg, and all you hear is about the Doha Development Agenda. Now, that is the negotiating leg. It's multilateral negotiations in launched trade rounds. Now, the third and final leg of this tripod, you know as well, for those of you who are watching who may be trade lawyers, is the dispute settlement body or the dispute settlement understanding. And here you know that what the WTO has is probably the most powerful and or the most influential dispute settlement mechanism in public international law. So whatever, and speaking about what we have to talk about now, and in contemplating any sort of analysis about the WTO, always think first and primarily of the tripod on which the organization stands: regular work, negotiations, and thirdly, dispute settlement. What I'm going to talk to you about as director of the Accessions Division, where I work with a team, is actually regular work, but it's a bit of a hybrid because it's multilateral negotiations, but not on the second leg. It's multilateral negotiations in the regular work of the organization. So what I'm saying that you have to register, you really have to register this and take it away with you if you take nothing else away every day. Every day since January 1, 1995. The WTO, its members negotiate with acceding governments on accessions. It's our regular work. But this is the negotiating function that is not part of the other leg I talked about, which is negotiation in launched trade rounds. So what have we done? It's important to understand this. So back to our regular work, multilateral negotiations in regular work of the organization. In 20 years, what have we accomplished? And I'll talk to you about the problem. So I'm not going to give you a Panglossian view of a world that's perfect. We are fragile in places. There are things to improve. There is much scope for improvement. But I can tell you that the score on that balance sheet is definitely positive. Let me tell you what we've done. Between 1995 and 2015, it's a 20-year period, our members, this organization has been engaged with basically 55 accessions, I think. Members have completed 34. Yesterday, now let me add to that. Yesterday, you know what else? You can add +1 to that 34. Members concluded the accessions negotiation of Liberia. So formal action will take place at the ministerial conference. So back to the fundamental point. 55 negotiations in working parties. 34 plus 1 Liberia yesterday. 21 or 20 as you will underway. that is not a bad record of what has been completed. If we go back to what has been completed, now those new members that negotiated their membership of the WTO, let me use a jargon and you stay with me. We call them Article 12 members. If you want, although we don't, you could also refer to them as recently acceded members if you want, but we prefer Article 12. Do you know how much of the WTO membership they now account for? 20%. That is significant. It isn't a small percentage. So what's the story beyond the numbers? Numbers and percentages are something, but what is it that tells a story that has meaning and significance with regard to the results achieved? Do you know that in the 33, 34 accessions done, there have been concluded approximately 550 bilateral market access agreements on goods. Approximately 250 bilateral market access agreements on services. I haven't included Liberia, which was done yesterday. Now, these discrete, separate bilaterals are then consolidated into market access schedules. And so you would have, for example, the market access schedule on goods, for example, China, or the Russian Federation, or Laopedia, or Vanuatu, or several of the 33, 34 plus Liberia that we've done. And you would have market access schedules on services. Again, numbers. What's the story? What you need to take away as well on the market access in terms of results is that over a 20-year period, WTO rules, as a consequence of the work with new members, WTO rules now cover 98% of the global economy. We have extended our reach as a result of accession negotiations. Think about that. Can we break it down to understand what in reality this means? I'll give you an example, several examples, and I'm still on market access. Part of what the WTO as a rules-based organization offers to the global economy is predictability of its rules, the stability of policies through bindings, and this progressive reduction in barriers to trade. Take predictability. Did you know that in the 34, as I referred to, completed accessions, tariff binding coverage stands at 99.9% rounded off. It's 100%. Did you know that with regard to the average level of final bound rates on goods, for example, for our Article 12 members, the average tariff binding is 13.8% for goods. Do you know what it is for original members? 45.5%. Let's disaggregate to agriculture and non-agriculture market access. It's 20.1% on agriculture for Article 12 members. Compare it to 65.4% 100% for original members. And on non-agricultural market access, that's industrial products, the final bound tariff rates average on NAMA is 12.9, if you like 13% for Article 12 members compared to 34% for original members. In services, if you look at the areas of specific commitments, Article 12 members have undertaken specific commitments in 100 services subsectors compared to 50 on the average for original members. In other words, what you are looking at is that in the area of accession negotiations, real market access in the WTO has been significantly improved by the new members as a consequence of their bilateral negotiations with incumbent, that is, original members, that subsequently the Secretariat consolidates into schedules. The story is a good one. And this is why you see that a lot of growth, a lot of the strong growth in the global economy since 1995 has been accounted for by the accessions of China, for example, believe it or not, the Russian Federation as well, Kazakhstan that we've done this year, they have been the biggest, and the other 32 you add to that accessions that have been brought under the umbrella of the global economy. Now, this is with regard to market access. So the story is a good one. Have a look. So, what does it say about the performance itself of these Article 12 members? Although they have been very good to the system of trade, of rules-based multilateralism, has the system been good to them in return? Why do I ask this question? You know why I ask this question. Frequently out there by the pundits and the analysts and those who play games and model. The argument is that the concessions, a misnomer in the use of that expression. The argument is that the concessions made by acceding economies put them at a market access disadvantage vis-a-vis original members. Surprise? It isn't actually true. Now we know, based on a database that we developed in 2010, the Secretariat, and Director General Roberto Azevedo will be updating this database and reporting to members next month. These Article 12 members, do you know what their trade performance has been? They have grown faster, trade and GDP terms. They have been more resilient in crisis, meaning that in those periods, and they always occur cyclically, when markets turn against economies, they have recovered quicker from crisis than original members. You know what else? They have actually had much better success in attracting foreign direct investment. Now the question is, why? It takes me to the next part of what I need to speak to you about, and hopefully thereafter we'll have a conversation. The WTO's market access considerations are key considerations in WTO membership, but it isn't all. Now I want to speak to the other part of what accessions have highlighted and underscored for the system. It's simple, but it's powerful. No amount of trade opening and trade liberalization will work in the absence of good governance. It's simply not going to work. It's a powerful and a critical intermediating variable. And so, when governments decide to apply and to start their accession negotiations to the WTO, beyond seeking to export, increase their market, what else are they buying into? Let me tell you what they're buying into. They are buying into the core values of the WTO. And those are the core values of integration into a global market economy, the core values of trade openness, of transparency, of good governance, and the rule of law, simply in the absence of which mechanical liberalization and elimination of trade restrictions don't work. To a large extent, the story of the World Trade Organization, which is a global public good, it's actually a story of good governance and integration into a global market economy. These are the geopolitical and the geoeconomic underpinnings of what the WTO is: a cardinal institution, a primary institution for international cooperation in the area of trade. So this is what we've done. The results have been good. The performance of Article 12 members have mattered. And we have, for this year, as I've said, we just completed the accession of Liberia yesterday, and we have one more probably queued up before the ministerial conference. So I'd like to end by looking at two subcategory of points. What lessons have we learned? What have we learned from accession negotiations? And when I ask this question, you have to juxtapose it to multilateral negotiations in launched trade rounds, like the Doha round. What have we learned? The second thing, penultimate, I'd like to look at is the challenges. Because I don't want to give you a Panglossian view of a perfect world. That world doesn't exist. Where can we do better? And to conclude, I would just pick up a few areas. Based on these two primary points, I'll pick up a couple of areas where examples from accession have demonstrated perhaps what is possible for the rest of the uh, membership, the lessons. Number one is trade negotiations are tough. They are. It's not a declaration. It's not a statement. The results from trade negotiations, they are not speeches. Surprise? They've always been that difficult. Let's go back together. Join me. Let's travel back. Let's go back in time to 1947. Realize as I do, recall as I do, that the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, which is the foundation of our system, because of all the difficulties in the negotiations, was actually temporary. It was temporary from 1947 until 1995. The GATT was a protocol of provisional application. And it wasn't completely and comprehensively full-born, elegant, with ribbons on it. It never was. Remember when development, part 4, part 5, I can't remember, the development section came in. It was almost 10 years after. Progressively, things have been added. You had in the 1970s, you had the Tokyo round that dealt with the codes. We have to understand international civil servants like me and others, and politicians above all, that trade negotiations are tough, they're difficult. No amount of headline news sensationalizing difficulties with ministerial meetings would mitigate that point. In trade negotiations, you hunker down. You lay a foundation. It's brick by brick, but it gets done. Do you know, on the average, how much time it takes? All the 34 accessions that I talked to you about. Do you know what the average time is for concluding one accession? One average time. Wherever you are, guess. Write it on a piece of paper. I'll count 3 seconds, and then I'll ask you if you got the right answer. It takes on the average 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. It takes on the average 10 years to complete one accession negotiations. Why? Because it's a process of domestic reforms and it's based on legislation. There is no silver bullet, and it's a partnership. And the toughest negotiations is not really between the acceding government and incumbent members. You know where the toughest negotiations are? We've learned from accession negotiations, they are domestic. It's internal government departments, it's governments, executives arguing with the civil society, other government departments, turf issues, trying to determine correctly, and I'm not being critical about it, trying to determine correctly what they would own, what would be the best interest of the country. Oh, believe me, the negotiations with the membership, that's the easy part, I can tell you. So, point number one lesson, they're tough. They don't happen overnight. Even ask those involved in the just concluded mega regionals beyond the mandate that was set. Secondly, the complexity, the diversity, the technical demands of negotiating issues have considerably enlarged over time. Remember, the GATT dealt with goods. Then the Uruguay round added trips, agriculture, intellectual property, services, and it's growing. In accessions, it's 360 degrees. So we also have to understand that lesson, that it will get more complex over time. It leads us to a third lesson. And that third lesson is that in a large membership, such as we have now at 161 and counting, you cannot have mass meetings. Meetings would have to take place in dedicated consultations, different formats and considerations. Who has more interest in this? And the system still operates in terms of its non-discriminatory approach. But it will work in different formats and considerations. We also have plurilaterals, including in the results of the Uruguay round. We have learned that as well. So there are a huge amount of lessons for the acceding governments, those who are acceding. Lessons learned. You need a chief negotiator, able, politically astute, policy competent, and technically able, with a dedicated negotiating team, focused not on the WTO and 10 other international organizations, but on the WTO per se. We're a huge organization. We have a huge agenda. We have a dispute settlement mechanism. And I say to you that those who cover the WTO governments, listen, you must learn to focus on it and no other organization. That bridge, there are so many bridges that just cannot be all connected. This is a world. It's a world on its own. And then there are best practices, there are lessons, areas. We know that technical assistance, capacity building, post-accession, all these are very, very important. I'd like to end on a couple of notes, as I said. Where are those areas, for example, where the results from accession, where the results of accession are so compelling? with such a salutary and impressive effect on the system. A rule spot, we've talked about market access. I'll give you a couple of examples and we can talk in Q&A. Take agriculture. One of the possibilities, one of the potential fruits for harvest for Nairobi is export subsidies in agriculture. Let me tell you something that you would like because of its surprise. Do you know that in the 34 accessions that we've completed, export subsidies on agriculture have been bound at zero? All of them, with the exception of one that subsequently joined a customs union. Major. Did you know that in market access schedules and goods, the AMS, sorry, no jargon, the trade, yes, I'm sorry about that. I was warned by Francisca and our colleagues, don't run off into the world of weasel words and jargon. Did you know that trade distorting domestic support, and the jargon in bracket is AMS, they're bound. It's bound. You can't go above it. It's in the schedules, the good schedules. It's in part 4. You do that, they'll bin you as they do in rugby games. You'll sit it out. It's important to understand the transparency, the predictability, the binding, and the reduction in trade distorting AMS and the redirection of domestic support for agriculture in the schedules of Article 12 members towards what we call DS1, basically the green box. No jargon, sorry about that. Green box. So it has mattered. One final example, and in Q&A you can take up any other area of trade policy and we'll discuss it. State trading enterprises. State trading enterprises are governed by Article 17, I think it is, of GATT 94. Basically, they're not prohibited, they're not disallowed on the condition that they operate on commercial considerations. But did you know that this rule, if you look at GATT 47, you look at, GATT 94, and you look at GATT Article 17 on SDEs, it doesn't, it's so open-ended and ambiguous in cases that thanks to accession-specific obligations, that provision in GATT 94 has actually been elaborated. Ask me how. 1. They have been defined. STEs for all the acceding governments have been defined, either in terms of state trading enterprises, or state-owned enterprises, or state-invested enterprises. But that's not all. Beyond the definition, and you have to define them in the working party reports of the Article 12 members, you also have to provide a list of all the state trading enterprises and annex it to the working party report. But we're not done in accessions. Many of them are also undertaking specific obligations with regard to the privatization of this STE. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is to bring you to what really would be my conclusion of this penultimate point, namely that the system has used, the WTO has used, the rules-based multilateral trading system has used accession negotiations to do 4 things. 1, to clarify, deepen, and extend the rules of the trading system. Systemic. Secondly, to give it to the acceding governments to use it as an instrument to set their own immediate, medium, and long-term agenda for domestic reforms. Thirdly, we've talked about that. We're concluding improvements in market access. And number four, not always obvious, to foster bilateral, regional, and international cooperation for trade. You can ask me for examples in Q&A, we'll do that. Finally, no system is perfect. We have WTO Accession, as Director General Roberto Azevedo said when he was launching this book. It's one of the shining successes of the WTO. It's an area of success, huge, unqualified success. But nothing is ever perfect. Can we improve? Yes, we can. In what areas? Number one, I think we can do better on technical assistance and tailored, custom designed capacity building. Secondly, what we have also understood from the experience of 20 years is that we need to better distinguish and refine and thereby design immediate post-accession support, distinguished from pre-accession technical assistance. So we've had a bit of a salad. We've mixed it all up. But we've also discovered that on day one of membership for the new member, until their first trade policy review, and I hear Myanmar is with us, and we may talk about that. I hear that one of the things that they'll like to do between day one of membership and the first trade policy review is to have a real post-accession support. I know that Myanmar did not go through the accession system. What I'm saying is also refers to countries that may have been, in a sense, inoperative or not active in a long while and may need such support as they get ready for their first TPR. Second lesson is there is a need for greater transparency. Accession is frequently described as a black box. I can tell you what we've done if you're interested when we get to Q&A so that I bring the lecture to an end. But I think there is scope for improvements in the area of transparency. And one good example is what Elizabeth and Francisca and Audrey and the team that have put this together have arranged with this e-lecture. This is part of what we need to do and do more of to explain what we do as an international organization that's a public good. It's an obligation, it's a duty, because we're paid as international civil servants, and it's our duty to explain and be accountable for what we do. And there we can do better, I believe. Thirdly, the process takes a while. On the average 10 years for one. But what I've asked myself, and there are no easy answers, absolutely no easy answers, because there are no formulae or formulas to apply. Can it be made shorter? Algeria, for example, is running at 28 years. We haven't completed it. But is there any way of contracting this, of compressing the time? I know it's a problem. I have to speak about it. I know it's a problem, but I don't have the answer because there is no way of contracting or compressing what basically is a process of domestic reform anchored to a support, foundational commitments to a rules-based trading system that is governed by a system of dispute settlement. If you don't get it right, that country cannot join. It's not something to talk about. It's not something to play around with. But I know that time is a question with regard to the length and duration of the process. And if you have advice for me as we begin to chat, I'll be ready to take it on and stand advised by good advice. That is it with time. I think basically they're telling me to shut up. That I've spouted on and gone long enough in this, and that it's best to put the ball in your court and take your questions. So why don't we go for your questions and see if we can elaborate on some of the core points that I made in the principal presentation. And thank you very much for listening. if by any chance you didn't fall asleep.
Thank you very much for this presentation. See, I've taken some notes. We have already received some questions. I hope you see the poll on the screen. I hope you're all ready for your questions, as we have the director with us. So you can see. I have a question, if
Oh, good.
I may
Of
start.
course, don't make it too hard.
You said the average time for accession is 10 years.
Mm.
I assume which one is the longest and which one is the shortest?
Well, the longest in terms of the completed ones, the
Yes.
longest in terms of the completed ones is Kazakhstan. It was concluded on the 27th of July this year,
Mhm.
after 19 years, 5 months, and 29 days.
How many hours?
Oh, I have to calculate the hours. I am so sorry, I've not got to that level of surgical exactitude, but when you invite me back, I'll give you the number of hours.
And the shortest?
The shortest was Kyrgyzstan at 2 years and 9 months.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
That's quick.
that was quick.
I have been moderating here in the chat, so
Mm,
we have received some questions.
right.
The first one I had received was, or two more related on the core values that you mentioned in the beginning, on the transparency, rule of law, and in relation with the accession process, with the basic principles that you adopt when you're a member, and also do you adopt all the agreements? Do you go with the TRIPS agreement, with GPA next week?
Yes.
So in that sense, how does it work? What is the outcome?
Excellent. Excellent question. Um, break down your question. Will an acceding government adopt all the agreements? Um, in principle, well, yes is the answer with regard to all the agreements that are not the plurilateral agreements. But increasingly, acceding governments, that is Article 12 members, also undertake a commitment in their protocols to start negotiations to accede to a plurilateral, for example, the GPA. So the answer is yes. And what you find in practice is that in the protocols, you would have an accession specific obligation that it would read something like this. Arguendo, the representative of Montenegro confirmed that upon accession, upon meaning the day it becomes a member, it shall initiate negotiations to accede to the government procurement agreement. And this is what we call an accession specific obligation, which, if you look at the standard protocol, is in paragraph 2 of the standard protocol. So your question unintendedly leads me to another advantage of accessions, essentially that it's used to leverage accession to other WTO plurilateral agreements. In other words, consolidating, reinforcing, extending, and making the system stronger. And on the first part of your question with regard to WTO rules being the synonym we use for WTO agreements, yes, unqualifiedly, in other words, without any qualification, the Article 12 member must accept all WTO rules and agreements, and in some cases undertake WTO pluses, which, I need to be clear, WTO pluses have strengthened the system and made it better.
That brings me directly to the next question from Mariana. I will read it out. Hello, I wish to ask Mr. Chiedu Osakwe, why is it that Accessions Article 20 members allow WTO to impose rules much more strict than the original country members? Example, China and the US in terms of agriculture, domestic support and export support. Isn't that the reason why the Doha round is risking to fail? How can WTO help countries to unlock the situation?
I think this, frankly, I don't know what other questions would come, but I think this is the best question of all. Why? Because it's a question I hear all the time, and we need to talk about it, my friend from, did you say China? My friend from China.
The examples were China and the US.
Okay, look at it from my angle where I'm seated. Number one, the decision by any government to join an international organization, in other words, to accede to it, for example, the WTO, is a sovereign decision. And I'm taking from your verb, it's not an imposition. Governments reach a sovereign decision to join. It's their choice. You know, one of the things that I did not speak about, my friend, is I did not discuss, as I should have done, the rationale for joining. My sense was that it would come up in questions, and you're raising it. Sometimes it's better to take this up in questions rather than to just offload them on listeners as a lecture. So back to your question before we go into the rationale. Why do countries want to join? Stay with me on my starting point. It's not an imposition. They decide to join. There is one. Is this sensitive? I'm asking myself not to use it. Sensitive to use this example. I'll give you an example. I don't think I'll lose my job because of it. There's a country called Andorra. It applied to join many years ago. Since then, it's decided differently. Don't ask me to break down that adverb I just used differently. I'm not saying differently means that they have not said they won't join, but they've just left it. They've left their application. I'm not criticizing Andorra. All I'm doing is I'm giving you an example that a government must understand why it wants to join an international organization that is based on a balance of rights and obligations. Because you don't join the WTO and you just sit at the table and make speeches. It's a contract. WTO membership is a contract. It's based on a balance of rights and obligations. So it's not an imposition, it's a sovereign choice. Second point I need to make. You see, you actually have to believe in trade opening. You have to believe in trade liberalization. You have to believe in the market economy. And you have to be non-mercantilist. And you actually have to consider, as I do, be very fundamentalist about this, that open markets, that good governance, that the rule of law, that removing restrictions from trade, whether my neighbor does it or not, is actually good for you. You see, your question is based on the assumption of the concessionary or concessional aspect of accession trade negotiations. I understand it. But also, please, my appeal to you is understand the point I'm making, that regardless of whether your neighbor does it or not, open markets, elimination of protectionism, removal of barriers to trade, integration into a regional market, a global market, regional value chains, and global value chains, for God's sake, they're actually so self-evidently compelling and powerful that it beggars the question of whether your neighbor does it or not. And what's the best example? It's China. 600 million people out of poverty. Now that China is growing, it's still growing well. The fundamentals in China are very good, but because it slowed down from 10% to 5%, the rest of the global economy is basically in trouble, principally the emerging markets. The story of China, the success of China, the second largest economy in the world, and powering on at train speed, is the story of what the WTO best represents: market economy, good governance, rule of law, trade opening, and transparency. Think about it. Those who have been more restrictive and protectionist and hesitant, uncertain, tentative, and ad hoc in trade opening, they're the ones who've done not as well. I can show you the examples. I will wait because it was not directly your question, but at some point in time before we close, I will have to answer that question that you didn't ask, but it's a footnote to your question. Why do countries want to join? Because I never really addressed it in my principal presentation, but I'll wait to see if anyone would pick it up, and then we'll pick it up. So the last part of your question was the question of, if the US did not do it, why is China being pressed to do it? I answered it in part. Stay with me because it's a delicate point. It's a fine point that needs to be understood. The rules and the disciplines and the principles of the WTO. Footnote, what are they? Non-discrimination, broken down, MFN, national treatment, values, market access, trade openness, transparency. They apply to all members. They do. They do. But here is the difference. Membership terms, take this away. Membership terms, even for original members, are not identical. They've never been. How could they be? Not when you have schedules of goods and services attached to the accession protocol of any member. In other words, from 1947 to 2015, what is it, 68, 69 years, I don't know. There are no identical terms and conditions of membership. It's the same rules, it's the same disciplines, and we've done a footnote on that apply to everyone, so you cannot discriminate. You have to open progressively your market. But the specific terms and conditions of membership, they differ for every member. Because to attach those rules and disciplines and principles are goods and services schedule. You have a variation. So this is why you have a dispute settlement body and you have a dispute settlement understanding. So anytime a case comes, it's not a blunderbuss invocation of a principle or a discipline. What the panel or eventually the appellate body will look at is the specific relations of the rules with regard to the specific obligations of member. And there, what's your Latin expression? Pacta sunt servanda. Contracts are to be obeyed. The WTO membership is a contract. You obey them. They're not identical. They're based on negotiated terms of membership. And why are they negotiated? They are negotiated because the structure of economies are different. They have been since 1947. That's the answer. We can do more of that. You can come back so that we give others a chance to pitch in, but I hope that was helpful.
No. Thank you very much.
Mm.
I think the next question will be from Steffen Schmidt.
I know him.
So here's a question for you.
Oh, really?
Chiedu.
Yes, he's a friend of mine.
What can we learn in our leg number 2, the multilateral leg, from the success in our leg 1 on accessions, driven by bilateral negotiations, if anything?
What can we learn from?
What can we learn in our leg number 2, the multilateral leg, from the success in our leg 1?
Oh, I got it. Yes, I know who the questioner is. He's one of the titans of the system, former ambassador of Denmark, now the WTO Director General Special Advisor on LDC negotiations for the Doha round, and also my chairman for the Working Party on the accession of Ethiopia. Um, the questioner is formidable. I think there are many things that I think there are several things that we can learn. Number one is there is no escape from the technical work. That's one thing we have learned from multilateral negotiations in regular work in accessions. There is no way of sidestepping technical work that has to be done. No amount of political posturing by any member, by any acceding government or groups of members or pressure of a political nature would exclude or prevent or allow an acceding government to do the technical work. So, technical work, what's that Clinton's famous expression? Technical work, stupid. You just have to do it. You have to do the numbers. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. There is no way out of it. So, technical work first and last. Secondly, the big picture. The big picture. At a point in time, negotiators must step back from the micro picture, which is important. Step back and look at the big picture. Am I prepared to delay my accession negotiations for another 24 months because I am not prepared to open up my financial services sector? And I'm prepared to protect vested protectionist interests in my economy who insist on import licensing for X, don't want to open up. So lesson number 2 is presidents and prime ministers, in other words, heads of government, must accept their responsibility with regard to making the major calls, not just in accessions, but also in the Doha round. In other words, Stefan, you know it much better than I do. Leadership, absolutely critical. There is no way of outsourcing. It is impossible to outsource trade negotiations to bureaucrats and civil servants. It's beyond their pay grade. If the president or prime minister doesn't intervene, forget it. It will carry on aimlessly for years. Lesson that we have learned. Number 4, I don't say this because he's my boss, but the Director General ex officio today, WTO Director General Roberto Azevedo, whoever is the Director General is the guardian of the system. There's no way out. You're not going to have 161, 62, the numbers are increasing, negotiate anything or try to drive the process. Lesson. We cannot have 161 drivers for one car. It's not going to work. So confidence must be enhanced and increased in the guardian of the system, and over time, ex officio the Director General, that we have learned as well. 5, what we've also learned is that for the successful accessions, and you know it well because this is what you, Stefan, did as ambassador in trying to move forward Ethiopia. Every accession needs a champion or a group of champions. And so Liberia, that has just been done powerfully, effectively, and unanimously, as every member says, it was very well championed by the United States of America and supported by the European Union. There is no accession that we have done that has not been championed. I'm director of accessions, and I'm not telling you a secret that in 2011 there was no chance whatsoever of concluding the accession of the Russian Federation if we did not have the United States and the European Union taking the Russian Federation over the line. I can tell that story because I know it and I was participant to it. So, 2 examples simply to make what I thought is a self-evident point. Accessions, they will need champions. The process is complex. I should have said, I did not then, but I should have said that an area for improvement is we have to find ways also of simplifying the complexity. It's a complex process. And the problem, the challenge for one of the most successful areas of the WTO work, the problem, and I find it baffles me sometimes, is there is no natural process of concluding any accession because there's so many wheels. And so I'm not being critical. I'm critical of an area where I work. I'm supervising, and I'm an international civil servant. But I can say that the process just doesn't end naturally. And this, I think, takes me back to the point that the Secretariat has a role to play with regard to facilitating and supporting a process that delivers superbly by any measure, but it has no natural way of being concluded. And it takes me back, Stefan, to the role of the DG, the role of a facilitator. And here again, I use you, Ambassador Smith, as a good example in facilitating, as you did, together with Ambassador Yi, now Deputy Director General Yi from China here in the Secretariat, and Hartmut Rubin, a German, gone back to Berlin, facilitating the accessions of Yemen and Lao PDR. So facilitation is important, and confidence in the facilitators are important. I don't want to provoke a good friend, Stefan, but you know what I don't believe in. So there's something I don't believe in that you know well. I'm not going to talk about it. I don't think that thing is helpful, but I'll leave it for now. We'll have a chat when I see you back in Geneva.
Also. It's noon. Maybe we can do a last question, and then before we move over to the chat session.
I'm happy.
Yes. I've received a question from China, and he asked about the TPP. As I think this brings us right back to the theme of the presentation, the power and relevance of the WTO. So, as one of the regional integration agreements, in what aspects will the TPP influence on the current global trading system? And because there are more going on regional agreements, what's the role of MTS?
Several points. First of all, I must admit my ignorance. I don't know the details of the TPP. I've never seen the details, so I don't know what is in there. Number 2, my Director General, our Director General, Roberto Azevedo, yesterday, or a couple of days ago, I think it was, applauded and commended the 12 countries that concluded the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and they should be. Why shouldn't they be? Any regional arrangement to improve trade to improve economic welfare is certainly helpful. To what? To growth and improve welfare in the global economy. So, to that extent, it's fine. Now, your question, though, was with regard to its effects, as I understood it, with regard to the rules-based trading system. Listen, this point has been made by every WTO Director General, including our DGs and the GATT. So the point I'm about to make is not a new point, and it's not novel. There will never be, and there has never been, nor is it desirable, by the way, to have a monolithic trading arrangement. Now, whether we want it or we don't want it, frankly, is meritless, is beside the point. The point is that there has always been a modus vivendi between different types of trading arrangements. We've always had FTAs, we've always had bilateral trading arrangements, we've had PTAs, now we have a first mega regional, the TPP. And listen, the rules-based multilateral trading system now anchored in the WTO shall always be with us. And to quote many, and this is where I come from, it's superior. It's the overarching legal framework as it should be and should be made to perform that accommodates every other trading arrangement. But I think that we have to accept, and it's not just the European Union principle of subsidiarity. There will be trading arrangements that will be better configured and organized at lower different settings and different configurations. Whenever we think about trading arrangements, my advice is that what we should always think about is a toolbox. You open that toolbox, you'll have a plier, you'll have a hammer, you have a screwdriver, you have a crowbar, you have a shovel, you have screwdrivers of different gauges. That's the way it works. You need different tools to do different things. FTAs do not jeopardize. Mega regionals do not jeopardize the indispensability of the WTO and the rules-based trading system. Anybody who thinks in those terms is extraterrestrial. The WTO is indispensable, it's irreplaceable, and it has been able to and will continue to coexist with different trading arrangements. You need different tools in one toolbox for trade liberalization and opening. Have you had enough?
Of
Right.
course not. We have questions.
Oh, I'm happy. I'm here.
Thank you very much. Uh, let's go and move to the chat session where we
I'm
can
ready.
answer a few
Yeah.
more questions. So,
Mhm.
but before you go, thank you for joining us today. We mentioned your book.
Thank you.
So, of course, here's the link. You
Okay.
can buy it online.
Can you ask them if any one of them has bought it yet? I'd like to know if anyone has bought it and how much do you have to pay?
Can you post it? Yes, we can ask. And so just for me to announce next week our second e-lecture series on macro WTO micro GPA. So as I mentioned, now we will move over to e-learning chat. As you probably know from our e-learning courses, you see the first link on screen. You click on the link and you come to our chat room. Also, we would like to ask you now or after the chat to fill out our feedback questionnaire. We have prepared one. And since this is a first time for us, e-lecture, and this we would like to know how you liked it, what you didn't like, and what we can improve, what you're interested in. So next time we can improve ourselves and respond to your needs. So see you in the chat area now. We are having a quick poll on the screen, as you see.
A poll?
Yes.
I'm not running for any election.
So we would like to know who of you, the participants, has purchased the book. So in a second, here you go. You can answer. Has anyone purchased the book? 100%. You can see the answers on the right, the numbers
How
and the
many have purchased?
percentage.
How many have purchased?
So far 3.
Okay.
For
not
14
bad.
people have answered.
Okay. Oh, the book is only 1 week old in the market, so
It's a very young book.
it's a young book.
It's a very young book.
Not as old as the WTO, but
4 people.
yes. That's good.
Keep voting.
Congrats.
Now.
Buy some more. But listen, I'm not getting any royalty, believe me. It's going to the WTO and to Cambridge, so no money comes into my pocket.
Okay. Then we move over to the chat.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
I did.
Thank you.
And yeah, I hope all my colleagues in the room enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
let's meet in the chat.
Thank you. Do I have to do anything now?